Last summer, I opted to skip taking any classes and landed a job at a gas station close to my college campus. The decision was driven by a bit of disillusionment with school, and I figured I could make some extra cash during my break. Surprisingly, the gas station was the first and last place I applied to, and they hired me on the spot. It seemed a bit odd, but I didn't question it. The catch, however, was that they only wanted me for the night shift, spanning from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I knew it would mess up my already chaotic sleep schedule, but I decided to give it a shot and see how it went. Surprisingly, most of the time, it wasn't that bad. The initial hours of the shift were busy, but the late night hours were considerably slow, giving me time to clean, restock shelves, and relax until the morning rush. While occasional suspicious characters wandered in, nothing had spiraled out of control until that one Thursday night. My coworker left around midnight, leaving me alone to man the station. Time flew by, and before I knew it, it was almost 2 a.m. That's when a man walked in, and I got an immediate bad vibe. He had a shaved head adorned with tattoos of strange symbols, and I suspected he was a skinhead. Not helping his case, he parked his dirty, lifted pickup truck in the handicap spot. As if that wasn't enough, he spewed slurs at me, thinking I looked Jewish. It was 1:58 a.m., and he spent a few minutes wandering around the store. In the end, he brought only a case of beer to the counter. Unfortunately, it was 2:01 a.m., and our county had a law prohibiting alcohol purchases between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. I explained this to the man, politely and apologetically, but he immediately grew agitated. He ranted about the law, claiming it went against the principles of a free country. Trying to reason with him, I emphasized I was just doing my job. This, however, led to him criticizing me, as if I were some spineless pawn for my boss. Feeling the tension rise, I asked him to leave. Instead of complying, he changed his tone, acting friendly and downplaying the situation. He suggested bending the rules for just a few minutes. Perhaps against my better judgment, I caved, sold him the case of beer, and he left with a satisfied smile. However, the relief was short-lived. Rather than driving away, he opened the tailgate of his truck, sat down, cracked open a beer, and started drinking. My gut feeling told me this wasn't over. A few minutes later, another truck pulled up, and two more guys with shaved heads and tattoos joined the first man. They stood around, smoking and drinking. Knowing I had to intervene, I mustered the courage to tell them loitering and open drinking were illegal. However, they stared at me through the window, smirking as if challenging me. Before I could act, an SUV pulled in, and two more guys joined the group. It was evident they were all part of the same skinhead group. My paranoia kicked in, imagining they were planning something sinister, like burning down the store because the owner's wife was Mexican. The first guy returned, even more intoxicated, and purchased another case of beer. Before I could refuse, he hinted at having friends who wouldn't appreciate me denying him. Feeling threatened, I reluctantly let him have his way. He went back outside, and the skinheads cheered at the fresh case of beer, tossing around the empty cans. Feeling trapped with these individuals, I decided to lock the store door, hoping they wouldn't come back in. I retreated to the office, called the police, and waited anxiously. A cruiser arrived after several minutes, and the officer told them to leave. There was some shouting, but thankfully, they left without causing a major scene. The cop waited for them to disperse before leaving himself. Worried about potential repercussions, I cleaned up the mess left behind. The next day, I reluctantly decided to quit that job. The fear of being stuck behind the register if those guys returned was too much. I still worry that one of them might recognize me around town. I don't know what those people are capable of, but my town is unfortunately full of individuals like them, always causing problems. Back in my 20s, I worked as an overnight lead at a local retail store. It wasn't your typical big chain grocery store. It had only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights, I had an overnight stalker to assist, but occasionally, I found myself alone for the entire shift. Given the store's size, It wasn't a high-pressure working environment. Sometimes, I deliberately slowed down my pace to ensure I wouldn't run out of tasks. On this particular night, I was flying solo, engaged in my routine of stocking shelves. My mind wandered, contemplating random thoughts, when a knock at the front entrance jolted me. Initially, I almost didn't register the sound due to my spaced-out state, but once I did, confusion set in. The knocking echoed through the store, and as I approached the entrance, I spotted a hooded man outside. "We're closed. Won't be open until 8 a.m., I conveyed through the glass, pointing to the closed sign on the door. The man gazed at me, but remained silent. I reiterated that we were closed, yet he continued to stare for a few more seconds before walking away. I observed his departure, but it seemed like he hadn't parked anywhere nearby. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off, assuming he was simply at the wrong place. By 2 a.m., I had covered half of the aisles and was ready for my lunch break. I left the boxes as they were and headed to the break room at the opposite end of the building. After about half an hour, I returned to work, strolling through the store and reaching the aisle where I had left off. As I glanced up, a man walked past the other end, seemingly oblivious to my presence. A sudden rush of fear enveloped me. Listening intently, I heard the man's footsteps heading toward the side of the building I had just come from. Instinctively, I hid behind the shelves, and soon after, I heard him rushing out of the break room. The footsteps transformed into a sprint, growing louder as they approached. Panicked, I ran for the other end of the aisle, glancing back to see the man turning and running towards me. Reaching the front door, I fumbled with my keys, unlocking it with shaky hands. Just as I stepped out, a bright flash caught my eye, accompanied by a deafening pop, a gunshot. The sound reverberated, and I sprinted around the building, making it to my car. Huddled in the back seat, I dialed 911. Fortunately, the man didn't pursue me outside. He had vanished by the time the police arrived. Upon investigation, the police discovered the back door busted open, accompanied by heavy tools nearby. The most chilling revelation was the gunshot hole near the front doors. The man's motive remained unknown, with law enforcement speculating it might be a result of a mental breakdown or psychotic episode. He seemingly had no logical reason to target me, except for the fact that I was alone. Following that harrowing incident, I no longer worked at the store. However, the years that followed were marked by heightened vigilance every single night, haunted by the memory of that unsettling encounter. On a cold December night, I arrived at the gas station, where I worked the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Having been at this job for several months, I wasn't particularly fond of it. However, finding alternative employment proved challenging, and considering some aspects of my life, night shifts suited my personal schedule the best. Despite my weariness every night, I struggled through each shift. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed only one other car beside the building, belonging to my coworker. After relieving him of his shift, it was just me for the rest of the night. The manager had left a task list on the desk, but it didn't seem overly demanding. My estimation was that it would take no more than an hour to complete all the assigned tasks. I procrastinated a bit, delaying the inevitable to prevent myself from falling asleep as fatigue set in. Around midnight, a car pulled into the station. Glancing out the window, I observed an old SUV parked by one of the pumps. Given the snowy weather, most people weren't out and about, making occasional customers a normal occurrence. Returning to my phone and scrolling through videos, I lost track of time until I looked up and saw the SUV still parked outside, its headlights off, doors closed, seemingly waiting for gas. Concerned, I peered outside, checking both sides of the building, but no one was in sight. Given the freezing temperatures, I grew nervous about the individual in the car. I paid closer attention, hoping to spot any movement or see someone return to the vehicle. However, nothing happened. It was as if the car had been abandoned next to the pump. After a moment's contemplation, I decided to put on my jacket and investigate. My suspicions were confirmed. It was too cold for anyone to be in the car with the engine off, and no one was visible outside. I approached the vehicle, looking through the windows, and called out, "Hello, anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay." However, from my vantage point, it seemed empty. Though not entirely certain, I was pretty sure no one was inside. Perplexed, I backed away and noticed shoe prints in the snow leading towards the side of the building, not the front. Inspecting the footprints, I realized they appeared to originate from the car. Feeling the chill, I decided to warm up inside before further investigation. Back at the counter, I turned on a small heater and warmed my hands. After only 30 seconds to a minute, a thump echoed through the building from behind me. Startled, I spun around, but there was nothing in sight. Walking around the counter, I noticed puddles of melted snow by the back room's entrance. Feeling a chill run down my spine, I approached the supply room. Turning the corner, I could discern the outline of a tall figure with broad shoulders and a large, scruffy beard, staring right at me from the dark. My heart paused for a moment, and after the initial shock, my instinct was to retreat to the counter. Perhaps shock had paralyzed me. Staring at the doorway for an uncertain period, I quietly picked up the store phone and whispered for police assistance. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity as I waited in fear. No sounds emanated from the supply room during this time, intensifying my anxiety. When 2 police officers finally arrived, I directed them to the man's location. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but to my surprise, they emerged without anyone else. The man had vanished. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, leading to fresh tracks in the snow that extended into the dark, empty field for miles. Despite subsequent searches, which were challenging due to the vast field and the cold, windy night, no trace of the man was found. The SUV was taken in for further investigation, but curiously, there was no history of ownership. The mystery of who the man was, his purpose, and his current whereabouts remained unsolved, leaving us with more questions than answers.